In the last video, we looked at how the regular income statement relates to the contribution margin income statement, and then we used the contribution margin income statement to derive the basic cost volume profit equation. In this video, we're going to use the basic cost volume profit equation to answer some basic business questions. For example, how many units do I need to sell to break even? Now remember, break even only means that our operating income is equal to zero. We don't make any money and we don't lose any money. We have the contribution margin income statement from XYZ Company off to the right for reference. Let's go ahead and write that equation and add some numbers to it. So I have the basic equation up in row 2. I'm not going to use the multiplication sign, the minus sign, and the equal sign when I start typing in numbers, but they're still there. So our contribution margin per unit is 75 from the income statement. We're going to take that times units sold, but that's the question I have. So we're going to just put in a question mark. That's my unknown. And our fixed costs are $750,000. I'm going to put that in as a negative number since we're subtracting that. And we want an operating income of 0. Okay, we can rearrange this a little bit. If I add 750,000 to each side of this equation, then what I end up with over here is 75 times something equals, these two cancel each other out, and then we have 750,000 on the right side. So basically what we have is 75x equals 750,000. Well, how do you solve for x then? We're just going to take the 750,000 and we're going to divide it by 75. We need to sell 10,000 units. We can check to see if that answer is correct. Remember that if you come over here and you look at my revenue equation, I'm multiplying the units sold times the per unit cost. For variable costs, I'm multiplying the units sold times the variable cost. So if I change units sold to 10,000 units, this should fall out to be an operating income of 0. And there it is. It works. Now, is there a shortcut we could do to come up with this same equation? Well, remember that what we ended up with at the end was the fixed cost divided by contribution margin per unit equals units sold. Let's just see if that'll work. So the fixed cost is 750,000. If I divide it by contribution margin per unit, that is 75, and that equals the 10,000 units sold. What I did is I rearranged the equation, the basic CVP equation, and I eliminated the operating income from it because operating income is 0. Let's rearrange this one more time just so that you can see what I'm doing. I rewrote the equation on row 13. Now let's go ahead and move fixed cost over to the operating income side, and we end up with something that looks like this. Contribution margin per unit times units sold equals operating income plus fixed cost. I just added fixed cost to both sides of that equation. If we want to isolate units sold, we need to divide by contribution margin per unit. We're going to divide both sides by contribution margin per unit, and let's see what we get. So now we have the equation units sold equals operating income plus fixed cost divided by contribution margin per unit. That is another cost volume profit equation. Let's put the numbers in one more time. So I'm looking for units sold. I'm going to add, I'm going to put it in parentheses, I'm going to add 0 for my operating income. That's my break even. I'm going to add fixed costs of 750,000, close that parentheses, and then divide by my contribution margin per unit, which is 75, and there's my 10,000 again. Okay, so we've answered the question, how many units do I need to sell to break even? The answer is 10,000 units, and we've proven that by putting it into our contribution margin income statement and seeing that it works out. Another way this question might be asked is, how much revenue do I need to break even? If we're trying to find revenue, all we're going to do is take the number of units that we're selling times the revenue per unit, and that will give us the revenue. So the answer to how much revenue do I need to break even is $1 million. Most business owners don't want to just break even, though. They want to earn an operating income. So how many units do I need to earn an operating income of $85,000? Well, let's go ahead and use both methods to do this. So my contribution margin per unit is still 75. We don't know the units sold. That's what we're trying to figure out. The fixed costs are still $750,000. And now my operating income is going to be $85,000. If I rearrange this, I get 75x equals, we're going to add 750,000 to each side. So this will be 0, right? Fixed cost plus 85,000 plus 750,000. So 835,000. 75x equals 835,000. So if I take 835,000 and I divide it by 75, I get 11,133. Now I wonder if there's actually pieces of this, right? So let's go ahead and increase this decimal a little bit. So this is actually 11,133 and a third units. Usually you can't sell 11,133 and a third units. You have to sell whole units. So let's see what happens if we come over here and we put in 11,133. We didn't make $85,000. We made something short of $85,000. So that answer is not correct. We always need to round up to the nearest whole unit, 11,134. Now we have a little bit more than $85,000, and that's the correct answer. So the answer is 11,134 units. Of course, we may get that question as, how much revenue do I need to earn an operating income of $85,000? And right now we're showing that you have revenue, that you will need to earn revenue of 1,113,400, right? That's the answer that we got using this method. Let's see if everything works out the same way going down here. So let's go ahead and do it using this method. We're going to do the operating income of 85,000. We're going to add fixed costs of 750,000. Close those parentheses, divide by our contribution margin per unit, and that should equal units sold. We get the same answer, 11,133, but we know that that is probably a fraction. And let's just look at that as a fraction. You can always use fractions here too. So that's saying that we need to sell 11,133 and a third units, and we know we're going to round that up to 11,134. So we get the same answer, 11,134 units, or $1,113,400 worth of revenue. I've moved that equation up because we're going to look at one more way of doing this. Sometimes, usually actually, companies will sell multiple products, not just one product. And so when they're looking at their contribution margin ratio, they're looking at a sales mix. And they can't answer the question, how many units do I need? Because they're selling 5,000 different products in that revenue mix. So the question, how many units do I need, doesn't make any sense anymore. The other thing that doesn't make any sense is the per unit amounts. Per unit amounts don't matter if you don't have any units. So what we're looking at now is contribution margin ratio based on the revenue from all of our products, all of our sales, less the variable costs from all of our sales, but we don't know what the unit costs are. Well, can we still use CVP? What we can do is we can change this equation. Instead of solving for units sold, we can solve for target revenue. And instead of using the contribution margin per unit, we can use the contribution margin ratio. This is going to give us a target revenue. So when we eliminate the unit contribution margin in the denominator, we eliminate the units in the answer as well, and we replace those with target revenue and contribution margin ratio. So let's go ahead and use this formula and see what happens in both of our prior examples. Now we can't solve for units, but we can solve for revenues in both cases. So how much revenue do I need to break even? Let's solve that one first. I would like to add, and I'm going to put it in parentheses, an operating income of 0 plus fixed costs of $750,000, and we're going to divide that by the contribution margin ratio, which is 75% or 0.75. There we go, $1 million. And that answer matches the answer that we got before. So this is another way to approach break even when you don't know unit costs. What happens if we want to do a target profit? We have a target of $85,000. Let's go ahead and put that one here. I want, again, in parentheses, $85,000 plus $750,000. And I'm going to divide that by my contribution margin ratio. Okay, so we got a slightly different answer. What is that all about? Well, we're not constrained to whole units here. So let's go back and see what happens if I change my revenue to 1113333. And I've set this formula up to take 25% of it. Our variable costs are 25% of our revenues. And so our contribution margin is $835,000, fixed costs $750,000, and that brings us down to an absolute equal operating income of $85,000. So now we have a correct range of answers. So I would actually accept any answer between $1,113,333 and $1,113,400. It's not a wide range, but any answer in that range would be correct. Okay, so in this video, we used the basic CVP equation to look at break even and target income, target profit or target operating income. And we also looked at how to calculate both of those when you don't have unit amounts, unit costs, and prices. In the next video, we're going to go on and use CVP to do some what-if scenarios.